Morning, I'm Harleysch from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 30th, 2024. President Putin of Russia asked the question yesterday, is the West committed to a world war? And he said it appears from the recent developments that that's the only conclusion one can draw. He's referring to these now 3 drone missile strikes against the Russian early warning radar stations. The purpose of these stations is to enable Russia to have an over-the-horizon view of when there are incoming attacks, including missiles. And what it means is it gives them a few minutes to decide how to respond. And a precondition for a Western attack on Russia would be taking out these missile early warning radar stations. So when they are being targeted with drones, the question that comes up for the Russians manning the satellite systems is this an attack? Is there a need for a response, a conventional response, or possibly even a nuclear response? So when you create a circumstance like that, where it's clear there's something going on, you're playing a very serious game. Now, the question that's raised by this is, were these launched by Ukraine or by NATO? And while Ukraine seems to be taking the responsibility for it, the Russians presume it's minimally done by coordination with NATO, but it may be in fact NATO itself which is doing the hitting, doing the strikes. So the question is, are they testing the Russian response? Now, the reason this is an important issue is because some in the West are saying that Putin is bluffing when he says Russia will respond to attacks on Russia. You have Cameron and others, including Blinken, saying that the U.S. would allow the Ukrainians to use their weapons, this is what the British and others are saying, to use their weapons to strike into Russia. So if this is happening, should the Russians assume this is being done by the United States? And what Putin said is that there are consequences for attacks on Russia. But this is where the West comes in and says, well, Putin's bluffing. He's not going to do anything. Keir Giles of Chatham House has said that we think Putin is bluffing. We shouldn't hold back just because Putin says he's going to do something. Strategic ambiguity is important. In other words, don't let Putin know whether you're actually intending to strike or not. Well, that's very dangerous. And that's in fact what they're doing. Now, there was another column or comment by Nikola Mikovic in a publication called Global Comment. And he's pushing the Putin is bluffing line. And what he said is that Putin is, quote, the king of empty threats, unquote. He engages in, quote, fear-mongering rhetoric, unquote. Now, by launching these drone strikes, Kiev is calling Putin's bluff, he writes. Well, is this smart to prod Putin? And the argument, or the point is rather, if Russia doesn't respond to these kinds of attacks, it faces significant damage if attacks occur and they're not responding to knock down those attacks and to counter those attacks. There can be significant damage to its military and civilian infrastructure, as well as to its military reputation as being willing to stand up and fight for its sovereignty. Now, that's why Putin on May 28th in Tashkent said, NATO should be fully aware of what's at stake. Are they looking for global conflict? And that's a rhetorical question. It appears clear to Putin and to his allies in Russia that, in fact, it is global conflict that the West is aiming for. Now, in the midst of this, you have the preparations for the June 15th and 16th phony peace conference in Switzerland, which includes Ukraine and a number of other countries, but not Russia. How do you have a peace conference that doesn't include the other belligerent? Well, it's obviously an attempt to pull the global south away from support of Russia, as many of the nations of the global south have been invited. But the question is, would something like that work when it's clear that the purpose of the conference is to isolate Russia, which would then serve to continue the unipolar order? Because the key to breaking the unipolar order is that the global south has been working with Russia and China against the Anglo-Americans. So the whole idea of this peace conference is not going to function. The other major conference coming up is the NATO summit, July 9th and 11th in Washington, D.C. And Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of NATO, along with Biden and others, are basically saying we can't let Ukraine collapse before this conference. So given the sorry state of the Ukrainian military, there must be an offensive, a way of building up the credibility of Ukraine in the face of the Russian attack. So for them, policy is purely symbolic. You launch these strikes so you can keep the narrative that Russia is weak, Putin is bluffing, and that the Ukraine is standing up, and they'll be able to defeat Russia if they get more aid, and so on. In other words, protect the narrative, regardless of reality. But the Russians see the reality. So do a whole slew of people, from Alistair Crook to Douglas McGregor, Jeffrey Sachs. The internet is filled now with experts who will tell you that Ukraine has lost and that now's the time to negotiate. So who are they pushing this for? Well, they're pushing this for the American people to confuse you and make you think there's no alternative. Now, then the one final point on Putin is bluffing. They said he was bluffing before the February attack with the launching of the special military operation. So their record is not so good. Now on Gaza, let's take a look for a second. The controllers of Biden are basically saying the U.S. is restraining Israel for humanitarian concerns. What about the strikes on these two camps in Rafah? It's two supposedly safe locations where people were instructed to go, where more than 50 people were killed at one and 25 and counting at another one. Where are the humanitarian concerns? The weapons are still flowing into Israel. Then you have the line that, well, we're building this pier to provide supplies. Well, the pier just broke yesterday, supposedly due to high seas. One might ask the question, was this pier built by Boeing? And it is the case that yesterday, another F-35 bomber, the so-called showcase for Boeing, just crashed. But the more relevant question is, what's the whole point of this pier? Why not tell Israel to open up the land routes so much more aid can go in? Well, now you have a shutdown again of aid coming into Gaza, where children are starving to death. And this clever idea of building a pier was taken care of by Neptune, the god of the seas. So you see once again the absolute fraud of this humanitarian concern from the administration. So the question is, what is the West up to? It's clearly in an escalation phase in Ukraine, in Gaza, and the talking against China. An escalation phase to do what? To protect the imperial order. But at the same time, the global south is moving ahead. This week, there's a conference in Beijing, which is the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum, which includes President El-Sisi of Egypt. It includes Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, representatives of Tunisia, the United Arab Emirates, and others. And what are they talking about? Cooperation, economic development, and Palestine, and having an approach to the Palestinian situation which includes a two-state solution, as Xi Jinping stated before the conference began. So the U.S. is in one direction with Israel on this. The U.S. and NATO are in one direction on the Ukraine situation, and the rest of the world is moving in a different direction. So the question then becomes, who will change the policy in the West? And that's up to you. That's up to our supporters, our friends. And I'm going to be putting some material in the description box that will help you in your organizing. The Red Alert press release is there again, which goes through the threat from the attacks on Russia's early radar warning systems. Secondly, a registration form for our upcoming peace conference on building a new Westphalian order to replace the current collapsing unipolar order. That's a June 15th, 16th, two-day conference online, and the registration will be in the description section. Then we'll also have my latest article, which goes through the evidence that it's the Anglo-American establishment that wants to continue these wars. Putin said they're ready to negotiate. They've been trying to negotiate. It's the West which refuses to negotiate. So here's some material for you so that you can organize your friends and neighbors and co-workers so that we can overcome this craziness of the unipolar order. Finally, tomorrow's Friday. I'll take your questions and comments. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. And that email address is also in the description section. So till tomorrow, I'll see you.
What it is that you might be able to do which can contribute to bringing about a solution, an escape from the collapse of civilization. This is no pipe dream. This is no fantasy. This is real.